You're not on mute anymore.
Oh, hello.
Good evening, everybody. It's so lovely to see so many of you zooming in again for the third part of our big question series, and we've got a really, really exciting evening ahead. As you know, we're going to be looking at the question of science and faith, which is going to be brilliant. And as Nico's not able to answer those questions, we've brought in an expert. You'll be pleased to hear. We've got Dr. Ruth, and this is my only attempt at pronouncing the surname, Bancewicz, and she will correct me later, I'm sure. But that's my best guess. So we're going to have a chat with Ruth in a bit. But before we do that, Nico is going to have a little bit of a chit chat with John, I do believe. Is that right, Nico?
That's right. Let's invite John in. Great to see everyone as well. Nice choice of songs today, Chris. I love the Justin Bieber song. You don't see it, but actually in the camera you can see Chris and Arvel dancing to a song, especially when we put Backstreet Boys. But John, let's ask John. John, can you tell us a bit of your story? Like, you did a course similar to this one like 2 years ago, and it would be interesting to kind of know your story. And please remember to unmute yourself before you start chatting.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nico. And hi, everybody. Yeah, your question, it's about the G word, isn't it? You know, that word beginning with G. G for, in my case, garlic. So why garlic? Well, I'm going to pull back to 1960s working class food. Those of you who were my sort of age, around 9 or 10 then, will remember meat, 2 veg, including boiled cabbage which you cut, shredded, boiled again, until the life had gone out of it, and then you dumped a load of bicarb into it to get some colour back. And my goodness, what an awful smell. What an awful smell. And it's a smell that I only got rid of sometime later, and I'll touch on that in a minute. When I was 13 though, I had the joy of meeting someone who took me home to dinner. And his mum had been to France, and in France they use things like courgettes, peppers, aubergines, and yes, you guessed it, garlic. And what a stunning moment that was to walk into that kitchen and to come across this amazing, mysterious smell. And never again was my life the same. I actually started cooking at that time using these amazing vegetables and garlic. Absolutely knockout. What a life changer. Now fast forward through my life, and it's been a really, really, really lovely life. I not complain at all. But as a churchgoer, I was kind of in and out. You know, the regular sort of traditional stuff, weddings, accompanying to my wife at Christmas, accompanying to church services with her on occasions. As I say, a really lovely life, but by about 2014-17, I was a little bit, empty, and I wanted to really know why. And that is why I actually took up an offer after a couple of years of not bullying, but forceful suggestions, but I'm glad I did, to attend an Alpha course. And then during that, a day I'll never forget, in November of 2018, on that course, it was the Holy Spirit Day. And absolutely, totally, I can't understand it, couldn't understand it, but I got that Holy Spirit that day. And Nico was there, and some others who may be on this may be there, but it was absolutely one of those things that took away all my senses. It made the same sort of life change, but so much bigger than when my senses changed with garlic. So it threw me back to my garlic time, and forever since, I know that my life has been so much richer as a consequence. It'll never be the same again. Not garlic this time, but God. Does that answer your question, Nico?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's great to hear your kind of story and how you discovered God at kind of later in your life. I'm not going to say older because you're really young, but just like 2 years ago. So it's great to hear your story. And thanks for sharing. And I'm going to pass over now to Chris and Avril again.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nico. John, thanks for sharing that. That was brilliant. And if anyone wants a copy of John's cookery book, I'm sure he'll put the details down on the chat. And if anyone's interested in doing an alpha course that John referred to, then have a chat with Nico and he'll be able to point you in the right direction. That would be life-changing for you if you've not done one of those. But without further ado, we have got another doctor in the house for you this evening. And just quickly, Avril and I have been part of the church here at Ashtead for 20 odd years, and for some reason been asked to host. So we're going to fire some questions at Dr. Ruth later on after that she's spoken to us. But before we get into your questions, we've got a couple of questions for Ruth. So Avril, what's your first question for Ruth?
Hello, Ruth. Ruth, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your life, what your job is, anything along those lines?
So, yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so sorry it can't be in person, but at least I can see all your happy faces on the Zoom. And so I'm originally from Scotland, although, well, I like to think I am, although I grew up most of my childhood south of Manchester. I went back there for a while to study. I studied genetics. That's where I got my doctor. I think with a science PhD, you do the same experiment over and over and over and over and over and over again. Eventually, they feel sorry for you and give you a PhD. Well, there's some writing as well. And I was a member of a group called Christians in Science, which basically does what it says on the tin, fellowship for people who are Christians and scientists. And they advertised a job working for them when I was graduating, and had decided that lab wasn't quite for me. So I worked for them for a bit, and then two members of Christians in Science set up the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge. And the kinds of things they were doing sounded quite exciting, that they planned to do. And I went, actually worked for both for a while, and then switched allegiances to the Faraday Institute. And my role there has always been to provide resources and support people doing things in churches. So I've been there for just over 15 years now. I had no idea that's what I would end up doing in my life. It's almost impossible for insurance companies to find a category for me. But it's lots of fun. It's very satisfying. It's been a bit different in COVID, I guess, like everyone's job. But
yeah,
sure.
And what would be a typical day for you?
At the moment, it would be maybe doing a little bit of writing, do some writing for both my own website and for other Christian magazines and things, maybe some working on websites, putting resources on there, usually some projects with other people working together to produce resources, quite a lot of events, helping to plan events, and a bit of advising people here and there, and always, the inevitable admin and things like that. It's like painting, my job. You spend most of the time prepping and clearing up, and a little bit of the time doing things like this. So.
That's brilliant. That's lovely, thank you.
So I see you do a lot of cycling around Cambridge when you're not doing all those other things. And I think, Ruth, I read online earlier today that you might have a book coming out soon. I'm not sure whether you're going to refer to that later on or not, but I'm just giving you the opportunity to plug that now.
Thank you, I do, and I will plug it thoroughly later on. Yes, so it's Wonders of the Living World coming out, and it very unusually, it's beautifully illustrated. So it's a coffee table book for those of you who look at science and faith books and think, I should read that, but I don't really want to. this one might appeal.
Sounds lovely.
Sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've got a flavour of who you are. I think your credentials pass the test, so we're going to allow you to share with us, Ruth. So I think without any further ado, if you're ready and you've got all the controls to launch into your talk for us this evening. So over to you, Ruth. Thank you.
Great, thank you thank you very much. I'll just press the right buttons and off we go. So, and I'm also very tickled tonight by seeing so many iPads entering the waiting room. I hope there are people attached to them, but that's quite fun. I think they are. We could have conversations about AI and machines choosing to do things, but anyway, so the choice of title for tonight, and I chose it, Does Faith Enhance Science? It is a big question, and it kind of turns upside down a question that people are more likely to ask about science and faith, which is, are they opposed? I trawled the internet a little bit for things that people had said in the last week. Well, when I prepared this last week, here's a sort of fairly standard quote. It's the pride of science to be falsifiable, unlike religion. So I think there is this general feeling among some people that you have to choose one or the other. Not everyone, though. Here's a survey of about 3,000 people from a few years ago, where they found about 30% of British adults took this kind of view. So it's not everyone. It is a minority view, but a very significant minority, and one that we hear quite a lot from. And about 10% of Christians feeling that the church is not entirely compatible with science. And this is an ancient cartoon, but I think represents some people's views, that sort of science leads you into atheism, or I guess for a number of people it would be the steps going upwards, beyond, out of faith into the great glories of science, as if you have to choose one or the other. But as my search showed, and as this survey showed, actually more of what's happening is, let's go backwards, not forwards, is this kind of thing. We've got the Faraday Institute logo here, but also a lot of other organizations who do things on science and faith. And when I Googled science faith or science religion, this is what I came up with. There's lots of people thinking about how they fit together, lots of academic research, and lots of organizations giving a voice to people who are scientists and who are people of faith, and what they actually think. And I think for a lot of people, this is where we end up. I think this was an article from the beginning of an article from the Church Times. It's this shared sense of wonder, expressed in very different ways. Slightly stereotypical priest or bishop with his crook and very Gothic lettering, and the scientist with a great big long, incomprehensible to me anyway, equation, both staring at the moon and being full of awe. And I think there is the beginning of our conversation together. I think people of faith who are not scientific, and people of science who are not people of faith, although there are both, and we'll talk about those in a minute, both sharing a wonder at the world and having something to say about it. And here's a quote from, just have a moment of my laptop misbehaving. I will just have a little wiggle. Sorry, it's just one of those Zoom moments. And we will start sharing again.
Should we sing a little song? Here we go.
There we go. Excellent. So conflict between science and religion is more assumed than real, although a sizable minority of the UK population does see conflict between the two. So that was Nick Spencer, who's a sociologist working at the Theos think tank, who's done a very helpful paper in 2019 thinking about this, and is running a project with the Faraday Institute at the moment looking into people's views on science and faith. So I am going to keep struggling with my slides. Excuse me. I will. If this happens again, we'll just go through it in out of presenter mode. I do quite like having pictures for you to see. Gives you something else to look at other than just me. I think we'll pop on to the next slide and then start zooming. So it is very helpful, I find, in these conversations to think about what science actually is. It sets a very good level playing field for conversations about things like, does faith enhance science? Well, science is all about gathering evidence. If you can weigh it, measure it, observe it, do repeated observations on the same thing, it's science. If you can come up with general principles to describe it, or a mathematical equation, it's science. Science is creative, science is imaginative, science involves intuition as well as lots of data. Put that in there for those of you who are a little bit tempted to think science is very dry. Science is provisional. That's probably one of the main criteria of science. If you can come up with things that can be disproved by someone else or by an experiment, then it's science. And because we're human beings, we need to reduce our bias. So science is very collaborative. We review each other's work or try and stomp on it, it sometimes feels. And if it doesn't break, then maybe it's worth publishing. Hopefully, the overall aim is to get nearer and nearer the truth. There are obviously some bumps in the road on that process, but overall, and you've seen that with the COVID research over the last year, we think this, well, actually, we think it's a bit more like that. Yeah, definitely a bit more like that. Yeah, really, definitely more like that. And then there's this other thing we know, and you kind of see the sort of growing understanding of things. And it's limited in scope. And I'll talk about that a bit later, but that's a positive, that science knows what it is. Sometimes scientists get opinionated and make it sound as if science can answer every question in life, but actually its success lies in knowing what it can do and what it can't. So if we look at this beautiful coral reef, the kinds of scientific questions you could ask were what species are involved here, species of fish, species of coral, crustaceans, microbes, all sorts of things all living together. How do they interact? What eats what? What eats what's waste? Which is an interesting, how is waste recycled? What nutrients do they need from the water? What do they extract? What is floating away from the reef? What is floating onto it? All sorts of interesting questions. The limits of science mean that we cannot ask, what should we do with it? Or why should we preserve it, for example, if we believe we should preserve it? Is it beautiful? Isn't really a scientific question. Science can tell you it's very, very colourful. But yeah, so those are the kinds of things that scientists are concerned with. So, pause and enjoy the reef. I think I'm going to abandon animations. And very sorry about this. Little Zoom issues. But I think what I'm going to do is just show you my slides out of presenter mode. So you'll get everything all at once. Sorry about that. But it seems to be the best way to do it without pausing every 2 minutes. So religion and science. So this is the kind of picture you get if you ask questions like, do you believe in God? Sorry if I made you just put your glasses on there, but at least the beauty of Zoom is you can put your laptop right up to your nose. Do you attend any kind of religious service? And the general population, well, in the last survey, we'll find out what the recent one gives. 72% of people believing in God of some kind, in some way. 14% of people, this was in the British Social Attitude Survey of 2016, saying that they go to some kind of religious service. The UK-based biologists and physicists around the same time as the census, about 54% believing in God and about 9% part of a religious service. So fewer, but not nothing. And this was UK-based, so this wasn't this was scientists from all over the world bringing all their different cultural views with them. So that's very interesting, I think. And looking at some of the people of faith, you have this chap, Praveen Sadapthi, who actually just gave a seminar at the Faraday Institute today, saying that the modern notion that deep faith, which cannot be seen, is somehow in direct opposition to one's ability to do rigorous study of what can be seen is a fallacy. So, plenty of scientists who would say that yes, science and faith do work, they do go hand in hand. And it makes sense when you look at the data. If you're a psychologist or if you're a child psychologist, I can see pictures of Nico's children on his profile, and kids just explore the world. We've all done it. You taste it, you touch it, you lick it, you know, even in COVID times. What's it all about? Doing science at a basic level is very, very natural. You do experiments. What happens if I poke it, drop it, bite it? Some experiments are not repeated, depending if the results are painful. And we are very naturally spiritual. Really, really interesting seminar at the Faraday Institute 2 weeks ago by Emily Burdett, talking about the psychology data that show that little children, toddlers, and older will very, very naturally believe in God. Atheists who are trying to bring up their children to follow, or you know, or to see the world sorry, I shouldn't say how people are trying to bring up the children, but if they've taught them that it's an option not to believe in God, sometimes surprised by what their children come out with, just because it's natural. You can do what you like with that data, whether you think it undermines belief in God or promotes it, but that's the way it is. And the early scientists, people like Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, when science was being formulated as a discipline formally by people who did it full time, it wasn't called science then, it was called natural philosophy, but they were nearly all people of faith. That's just the way it was. And their faith contributed to the rise of science. So obviously there were others with others' faiths who were involved in the rise of science, and as well, people in Persia, Muslims, and others. But when it came over to the West, Christian theology did its bit of contributing. The idea that, for example, that you have to do experiments. We don't know the mind of God. If God created the universe, we can't predict how it would be. So we have to go out and look at it, which sounds obvious to us, but there were schools of Greek philosophy that thought that you could sit in your armchair and understand the world just by thinking about it from first principles. So there were a whole load of reasons why Christian theology contributed to the rise of science. And Peter Harrison, who's done a number of talks at the Faraday Institute, if you're into listening or watching, or written some fat books if you're into reading, has done a lot of work on that, and a number of other historians. So here's another quote for you from a Christian who is a scientist. Professor Christine Dunn from Durham University has said that, for me, the more we know about the vast yet intricate and beautiful universe we live in, the bigger and more inspiring is the God who made it all. So for her, faith definitely enhances her experience of science. And here's another one, Francis Collins, who's been very busy recently running the NIH and producing vaccines, who has said that it is possible for the scientist believer to be intellectually fulfilled and spiritually alive, both worshipping God and using the tools of science to uncover some of the awesome mysteries of his creation. So why is it that these people think that science is contributing so much, or faith is contributing to their faith, that the two go totally hand in hand? So what I'm going to do is I want to think a little bit about how a Christian's faith, if they bring it to science, can help with the process of science. This is quite fun. I'm hoping that we can get some controversial questions going in the discussion time. This is quite a provocative topic, and kind of deliberately, because I think it is, so often Christians are asked to respond to science versus faith, but it's quite fun to actually pose my own question. So I'm really keen to hear what you think. Sorry. So, thinking about a theology of science. Well, first of all, there's the teaching in the Bible that God is rational. He is a thinking being, and we are made in his image, so we are rational too. We are entrusted with the task of tending and keeping. That's the Genesis 1-3 story, or 1-2 story. Here it is. You are my image. You are there to look after this. You're my representatives. And what better way to do that than by understanding what we see, so that we can do that job better. There's the idea that God is the cause of everything, or if you're using quite philosophical language, the idea that God is the primary cause, the unmoved mover, who does everything, takes care of everything, but does it using regular mechanisms. We can study those mechanisms. We can study the secondary causes that he uses in order to keep the world running. And that's the amazing thing about science. Nobody knew whether we could do repeatable experiments. They probably had a hunch that you could, because you can see, you know, the seasons coming and going. You can see the consequences of actions. You could see, you know, just as people, before we even start doing science, you can see regularities in the world. But when people, this was a kind of a step of faith of the early scientists, they said, well, God is, one of the reasons they justified doing science was they said, well, if God sustains the world in regular ways, we should be able to understand those ways. And those are the mechanisms that we study. So you can think of the ways we look at the world in two ways, meaning and mechanism. So if you look at a kettle if you can look at a kettle boiling, you can ask, you know, why is it boiling? And a student in a physics class could give you a very nice essay on water molecules moving and moving faster, and then forces that hold them together, and then overcoming those forces and becoming steam. That's one kind of thing that you can do. And then another way of looking at it is to say, well, why do you want a cup of tea? Because none of us are thirsty. You know, you might not even like tea, but we're going to have a cup of tea because, you know, oh, I've done this. I've accepted cups of tea that I didn't want. I don't like British tea because I'm being polite. We're sitting down, we're catching up, or we're getting to know each other. And, you know, that's what we do in this country. And every culture has its ways of hosting each other. And some of that is probably can be looked at scientifically, but some of it's about meaning, it's about purpose, and those questions go beyond the limits of science. So, and you don't have to choose between mechanism tea or meaning tea. I mean, the water's boiling, you know, whatever reason you want a cup of tea. The other thing that faith gives is ways of thinking about what we do with science. We are to use our knowledge for good. And Christian faith will give particular reasons for doing that. So, for example, if you think about the mobile phone that is made with a lot of scientific know-how, you know, I would say, well, I can use it for good. I can use it to connect with people. I can use it to reach out. I can use it to learn things. I can use it to read my Bible. I can use it, even tools to help me pray. Or I could use it for, you know, every technology. You can find ways. We're human. We can find ways of using it for bad. I can use it to be rude and ignore people. I can leave my alerts on while I'm in a church service. You know, things like that. And then this is a big meaty one, but something I think is worth bringing up. Everything is God's. So often our discussions about science and faith are dominated by the idea that there is natural and there is supernatural, as if natural has got nothing to do with God. Even Christians sometimes slip into that language, and supernatural is God's domain. Well, actually, and I've got the picture of the planet Earth there, everything is God's. You know, let's not forget that. What does that have to do with science? Well, looking at the question of prayer and miracles, so often when people pray, things happen. And you can have a scientific explanation. Colin Humphreys, who's spoken quite a lot at the Faraday Institute and written a number of books on this, has looked into the mechanisms behind the miracles of Exodus, for example, crossing the Red Sea. And the Bible says, you know, the wind blew all night and the people crossed over in dry land. So the mechanism is explained there. The miracle is because it happened when, you know, thousands of people were standing on the bank about to lose their lives at the hands of the Egyptian army. And they prayed and they crossed over on dry land. And there are countless examples of that in the Bible. Well, I bet someone has counted them. They usually have. Sometimes there are things that defy any kind of scientific explanation. You don't need to be a scientist to know that the resurrection was most unusual of Jesus Christ. Both types of miracle or answer to prayer, however you want to define miracle, I believe as Christian are actions of God. They further his causes on earth. They reveal something about his character and his relationship with us. So I can carry on as a scientist. This is, wow, I can't even advance my slides. Oh, there we go. This is what I was often doing in the lab. I've got there a little pipette and some gloves, I've got my white coat on. This isn't a picture of me, but it might as well have been. I could function in the lab because I know that God only does unusual things in order to further his relationship with us. If I'm trying to do an experiment, you know, this is what scientists have found. Our experiments reveal the regular ways that the world works. So I can function as a scientist in the lab doing my experiments. And, you know, I think, I can pray for my colleagues. My faith affects the way I behave. It affects probably my reasons for doing the research. You know, all sorts of things, but it doesn't affect the outcome of the experiment. And it, you know, I think this is something that people worry about, you know, that will I start praying for a particular result and doing some odd science? Well, I think praying for a particular result would be a misunderstanding of who God is. Who am I to tell him how he should have created things in the first place? You know, or asking him to do something different. It's a complete misunderstanding of science and a complete misunderstanding of Christian faith. I could pray for a colleague to get better if they were sick, but I can't pray for God to change the basic structure of the way the world works. I hope that's clear, and if it's not, please do pick me up on that in the question time. But I think faith really does enhance the process of science, and I think belief that God can act in the world doesn't take away from what we do as scientists. Another way to think about faith enhancing science, I'm sorry you're seeing the text all at once, but anyway, this is Zoom life, is to think about theology of nature. So some people may have come here to this talk today thinking I was going to make a case for the existence of God, and I'm not going to do that. If I was going to do that, I would present a very different talk, and I would go much broader than science. Science intrinsically, you know, the definition of science was that it has to be disprovable, but it didn't say that science proves things. Science is about building up evidence bit by bit by bit for the way the world works. Only mathematics can come out with ultimate proofs of things. And I think it's probably the only thing in life that can come out with ultimate proofs of things. And even then, a mathematician will probably pick holes in them. But we can, and people do say, well, okay, then is there evidence for God from science? And that's natural theology. I'm very cautious about that. I think there are some very general things you might say about God from science, but I'm much happier with a kind of theology that a theologian called Alistair McGrath, who also has a scientific background, has puts forward quite a lot, thinking about Christian theology as a lens to look at the world and asking, does it make sense of things? Does it bring things into focus? And I think it does. I think my Christian faith helps me to make sense of the order I see that emerges from the disorder in the world, the beauty that we enjoy, the fact that at the moment it seems that the world had a beginning, that it's very fruitful, that things, despite all the disorder in the world, or actually because of a lot of the disorder in the world, that can be channeled and constrained in order to produce complexity. Again, ask me about that, or buy Wonders of the Living World and read the chapter about that. And overall, I think science is consistent with Christian theology. And I would go beyond that and say that Christian theology makes very good sense of what we see in science. So here is a beautiful place that I hung out in a few years ago. This is a bit of temperate rainforest on the west coast of Scotland. There's not much of it left, but it was incredible. Actually, the dog took us there very wisely, probably smelled good. And we briefly passed through and said, this is absolutely beautiful. I went back early the next morning, well, holiday early. Sun was fully up by then. And it was completely stunning. Probably the kind of landscape that our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents grew up with, which was a complete patchwork of different kinds of moss and lichen and grass. Absolutely incredible. Ferns hanging off the trees, like, half close your eyes, it looked like a tropical rainforest. My science told me a lot. I saw my first slime mold. It's quite exciting. Whatever floats your boat. I like slime mold. But my science fed into my Christian faith, and my Christian faith is feeding back into my science. So my Christian faith makes me value, it's for me is what makes me value what I see in nature. And then also my science was helping me to notice things that I wouldn't otherwise have noticed, and I can thank God for them. And my theology, Christian theology, led me to sit there and join in with all the praise of creation. So I could hear the insects humming, the birds singing, and sit there in the sun and join in with saying thank you to God alongside all that. So I think faith definitely does bring something to science. In fact, I don't think science would have developed in the West without it. And it definitely goes the other way. And this is the subject of another book, which I'll bring to your attention at the end. Science enhancing faith, the beauty we see. I've already mentioned this, various quotes and things, the creativity that we get to express in science, the sense of wonder that our discoveries give us, and our questions about the world give us, the fact that we get to use our imaginations to think about what we see, we experience a sense of awe. All these things, I think, really contribute to our Christian faith. You're going to ask about suffering. I know you will, because it always comes up when I've talked about these very positive things. And as a Christian, I would say that, again, this helps me to make sense of the science and the very upsetting things that we might see in particularly recent events. And I would say that it helps me to understand that we have not done our job well. And the first people who were given a responsibility to look after the earth did not do their job well. And a rift formed between God and people, between people and each other, between people and creation. And we live with a lot of the fallout of that. I think a lot of the suffering we do experience is caused by other people, indirectly often. We're just coming to terms with the effect of pollution on our lungs. For example, it's very easy to underestimate the effect of human sin. I use the word sin because I can't think of a good it's a very rich word that encompasses a whole load of ways of rebelling against God, including things like selfishness. So that's one explanation for suffering. Also, it was very good when God made it mean. A scientist can tell you that pain is absolutely essential to life. It's an incredible teacher. We know we have friendly viruses and friendly bacteria. We know we need a bit of global warming to make life possible on Earth. So these processes that are now distorted by human sin were there in God's very good world. We don't have access to what that world looked like before we started to trash it, or before the effects of human sin started to distort it. But I think some of the processes that we experience as unpleasant, at the very least, I think may have been there already. But we would have experienced them differently if we lived in proper relationship with God and each other and creation. These are huge, huge issues. And it's very, very difficult to talk about this in the abstract. The most important answer to the question of suffering is that Jesus suffered too, and he knows exactly how it feels and identifies with everything we went through. The fact that he died was to rescue creation, and to buy us back, if you like, after we'd sold ourselves out, and is offering his help here and now to deal with these things. So that, and I certainly know that environmental scientists are suffering, and many of them suffering from deep, deep depression, by looking at what we've done to the planet and they're losing hope. And it was a beautiful piece that my assistant a number of years ago wrote, compiled from, I should stop so we have questions, from Christians whose faith brought to their science a sense of hope, because we know that we have God's help here and now to get into a better relationship with creation, and also anything we really love about the earth, good and beautiful, points us to the fact that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. That's not an excuse for looking after what we see now. But anyway, I'll move very swiftly on just to summarize what I've been saying. Faith enhances science. Christian faith provides a framework for doing science well. Science enhances faith back. So deliberately quite provocative, a huge amount to think about. Hopefully something that is very encouraging for those of you who have Christian faith. Yeah, so this is the book I mentioned, God in the Lab. There's a huge raft of resources on the Faraday Institute. I've mentioned most of the people I've mentioned, most of the topics I've mentioned they're all mentioned in talks and things on this website, and the churches section has a book list if you go into resources there, if you're into books. This is the book that was mentioned, Wonders of the Living World. Join us on the 14th of June if you want to find out more. And time for questions. Thank you for listening. I should also mention there's a top 10 questions where a lot of the usual questions are asked on our website. So I will stop sharing now so I can see all your faces, and hand over to Chris and Avril for the questions.
Thank you, Ruth. That was brilliant. And we have so many questions. So you might want to take a deep breath. I'll start with this is not, I was going to say I'll start with a simple one, but it's not that simple. So brace yourself. Someone asked, my 12-year-old daughter came home from school announcing that she didn't believe in God because she believes in the Big Bang Theory. Can these be compatible? And how would you answer her?
Yeah, and I think it's a shame that she picked up that she had to believe one or the other, because again, I think it's that meaning mechanism thing, that if God chose to create the universe through a Big Bang, great, can't argue with that. I just think it's very sad that young people have these barriers put up between faith and science, because, as I said, for so many of them, they are naturally very spiritual, and that rejecting God because of science can be accompanied by a real sense of grief, I think, and loss. I think yes, there are tough questions there. And I know there'll be questions about biblical interpretation, but I think there are lots and lots of Christians, including very distinguished theologians from all sorts of different Christian traditions, who are totally fine with that.
Thank you.
Yes, so Ruth, I mean, a follow-up question really from somebody saying, can we interpret the Bible to get closer to the Big Bang from a time perspective than the 7,000 years or so that can be implied from Genesis?
Yeah, so I think that that first chapter of Genesis, chapter and a verse, are a very, very rich text, and I think we need to go to people who understand Hebrew to help us to understand it properly. It's about an event where no one was there. It's for the only bit in the Bible. I don't know, might be wrong. There's a bit of Job that talks about flowers in the desert, but yeah, it's an ancient story, and the text itself is very, very ancient. It's written with a very particular structure, and you know, for example, the first 3 days that are describe spaces, the sky and the sea, and you know, there's the sun and the moon, so all these big divides are set up, and then in the other next 3 days, those spaces are filled. It talks about the sun being created on the 3rd day. You know, so I think there's some hints in there that this is much more than it's not a scientific account of the way things were. People taught people very differently then, and I think we need to look at how people taught and told stories then, and what a story true what theological truth is communicated in that story. I believe scripture is God's word, and how you know, what it's trying to tell us, and I don't think it's a scientific textbook. So I realize some Christians have other views, and will be very sincere about those, so I have to respect that, but yeah, I think we can I don't think it's telling us that the earth is 6,000 years old.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. So do you think that a scientist should ultimately end up believing in God? Do you think they will naturally get to that point?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think certainly in Cambridge, it's or maybe a lot of universities, it's a bit of a thing that Christian unions are often full of scientists. I think partly scientists are more likely to go to organized events, so probably a lot of Christian sociologists who aren't there, but it's quite astounding how many scientists are people of faith, and I think it's partly that very rigorous looking at the evidence, and a certain way of thinking. I can only speak for my discipline, and you know, I'm not going to speak for other people's disciplines, but I think the way a scientist might encounter faith is, you hear stories of people, and I wrote a book called Test of Faith, last plug, no more books to plug, which was stories of scientists, including Francis Collins, who I mentioned, who appears in the Alpha videos, which I think some of you have used. He you know, they were challenged. Actually, for him, it was an elderly lady in a hospital who told her about his faith and said, "What do you believe, doctor?" And he just fled because he felt embarrassed because he hadn't thought about it. And it's a very common story that scientists will start thinking and looking and exploring, and then realize that the evidence for Christianity is very, you know, it's very good. And actually, like some, Francis Collins, he was a bit sad about it, but, you know, he didn't know what to do with it. He felt, and then eventually he encountered Jesus, learned about the person of Jesus, and was glad. So, but it's a story of following the data, and I think the intellectual honesty of the top scientists like Francis Collins and a whole host of people who have the courage to say, I might be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I might hate it. And my colleagues might think I'm a complete weirdo. But I have to be honest and follow the data. And I think that's what it takes to be a great scientist. And no one can keep that up forever. But you can have moments when you're that courageous that can get you very far, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Ruth. You mentioned earlier on part of your talk about young children's sort of natural belief in a God, and someone's asked the question here: how did the data present itself for you to come to that conclusion?
Yeah. Well, not my conclusion. Emily Burdett and a guy called Justin Barrett, who's written a number of books. And actually co-written a book that's all about how we're sort of inhabiting a modern world in cave person bodies. And there's a bit of a mismatch, which I think is wonderful, especially during these times of staring at computers. But with the children, they were doing very simple tests, like here's stuff in a box, look. And there was something unexpected in the box. And then they'd say, close it up and say, does mummy know what's in the box? And of course, mummy knows everything when you're 3. Yes, mummy knows what's in the box. Does God know what's in the box? Yes, or culturally appropriate word for, person that people tend to believe in. Yes. And eventually they realize that mummy actually doesn't know what's in the box, but that God does. So those kinds of very, very simple tests, or natural belief in purpose. I mean, that's not related to belief in God, but children are very, very much more likely to say, oh, the rocks are pointy so that people don't sit on them, so it's just innate to presume that things have a purpose. So some of these beliefs, theologians would call it folk theology. We just are believing that people have souls. We just tend to believe in that. I would say a grown-up Christian scientist, a number of neuroscientists would say the question of soul is a bit more subtle than a floaty disembodied thing. But anyway, that's a common belief of children. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Before I dig myself into a complicated hole, ask me the next question.
We like complicated.
It gets worse. I don't understand some of the questions, but this one I do. What is your view of Richard Dawkins?
First of all, that he's a human being who God loves. I think his science is the way he communicates about science is lovely. Really, really like his books and their descriptions. When he's getting really passionate about the science, it's very easy to listen to. Great communicator. On the theology, on the faith, he gets really angry really quickly, and I don't think anyone knows why. But I hope it isn't something, that harmful that the church has done. But he gets very, very angry about religion. I've called it child abuse. But I think I disagree with his view that science is everything. I think he's begun to backtrack from that in recent years. I think he's even put himself in the position of a agnostic, that you can't fully say that God doesn't exist. So he's softened some of his views a little bit, but I think would still say that religion is evil and that God doesn't, that God doesn't exist. He believes that God doesn't exist. I think we have to be very, very careful what we claim from science, because science, any of the really big questions about meaning and purpose that are complex questions, science tends to answer quite simple questions. How heavy is it? How does it work? They might seem complex, but they're nowhere near as complex as what should I do? Science can't answer those very, very complex questions.
That's great, Ruth. Ruth, thanks for that. We're going to move on to vaccines. Christian, so what is your view about Christians who are anti-vaccine? I think that's probably related to COVID, but maybe all vaccines, and who take issue with some aspects of medical research when the ultimate aim of the research is to treat/cure illness and do good, in speech marks.
Yeah, really helpful question, and one we need to think about. And I think it partly comes from a critique of science, which to some extent is, it's good that we think, it's good that we ask why, it's good that we don't just believe everything because we're told it. That's what postmodernism has brought us. I'm not pro there not being any truth, but I am pro critiquing and looking and wanting to think and ask questions. I personally think we do need to trust to some extent, and we choose what to trust. I mean, you choose to trust the bus driver or your own driving or the manufacturer of the car. I choose to trust the vaccine. I know I've had it. I was accidentally on the shielding list, so I got the I've had the vaccine by now. A few weeks ago, I was fine, and I knew that there could be side effects. It wasn't too difficult a decision to have it because, it had been thoroughly tested. I knew I'd be one in I can't remember the number, but a very small number. I would take more risk going out on Cambridge roads on my bike. But my lodger, who was a doctor at the time, was in the vaccine trial, and she had to scratch her head for a little while and think, do I take the risk of life-changing side effects by being in this trial? And in the end, she went for it. But those are the kinds of decisions we do need to take. But I think we need to be very careful about who we listen to. Goes without saying, being discerning about what's on the internet. A friend of mine's father was, she sent me a YouTube video he'd found very convincing, and it was a mixture of good science and things that I thought were really, really not helpful and not based on scientific data. It's really difficult to discern the difference between them. I was out of date enough on the science to say, it would take me a long time, I could do it, to pick out which bits were not, I think, unhelpful, and which bits were really good science. But I think people have different vested interests, we have to be very, very careful who we listen to. But I think overall, reasons to accept a vaccine, the risks are relatively low compared to catching the disease. That's why we're given them. It loves our neighbor. As a Christian, I don't want to go around spreading a disease, even if I may not be severely affected by it. All sorts of really good reasons why we should take them. But it's a long discussion in all of these questions. I'm not the oracle. You're getting my view and a very briefly expressed view.
That's helpful, Ruth.
That's great.
That's great. I'm sure you could spend hours on each of these ones. Just for everyone's benefit, we're going to push the questions on a bit, so we'll probably close nearer to 9 than 9 o'clock tonight, just so you know. So if there's anything that you're itching to ask, please put it in the chat, and we will try and get there with the questions. Avril, next question for Ruth, please.
I hope you don't mind going a bit longer, Ruth. Can you?
Yeah, I've got to go. Sorry. No. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So the next question is, I can see how science shows the existence of God. Is there anything that points towards the existence of Satan?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. Yeah, really, really interesting. And again, so I've started studying theology, so I can really now I'm doing disservice to theology, but it's really opened my eyes to what we think about things like this. And just seeing the range of views on something like Satan, is this a being with personality, or is ascribing personality to an evil power, giving them too much credit? Are we more concerned with the evil that can kind of take over an organization, and it can sort of exist in this sort of self-fulfilling sort of evil bubble, sort of social evils? It would make sense to me that there might be a being that is evil. Does science I think we could get very close to saying that there's something beyond the sum total of human wrongdoing or sinfulness. And certainly looking at something like this virus that has inflicted us, I know that a lot of the things to do with transmission, to do with the way it was picked up by humans in the first place, were to do with human wrongdoing, but there's something about the way it has spiraled around the globe. And yes, we understand the mechanisms of that, but and the way that other things afflict human beings, particularly in times of war or unjust government, that you just think, no, there's an evil, there's an evil something that's, we're steering askew here, and I'm not sure it's all humans. I don't know. It's a really controversial topic, I think, for Christian theologians. But I've done the sum total of, I think, half first year undergrad in theology, so I will not presume to have all the answers. But from a scientific point of view, I think you might say there's possibly something more than the sum total of. But yeah,
that's really interesting. It's just about. It's great to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Ruth, before we get into some of the closing questions, which I don't even understand the question, so I'm going to give you an easy one. The question was, God as a creator may be an easy stretch for a scientist, but what about God as a miracle worker active in his creation today?
Yeah, and I'm really happy with that. So I believe that my hearing got better in this year after someone prayed for me. I had foolishly, very slightly deafened myself. I don't have before and after data to prove that, but I've experienced that myself, and other people have experienced things. I don't know why God does it. I know that it, I don't know why he chose to heal that particular thing and not other things that I've prayed for, but I think sometimes he's just saying, I'm here and I love you, my relationship with you is important. Sometimes people are healed dramatically, sometimes very small things like me, and I think I'm perfectly happy with the idea that God works in very regular ways. That's what we study with science, those secondary causes, those mechanisms that just the world just ticks along. But sometimes God just does something else in order to relate to us. I believe that's just the way the world is. We've got to work with it. We can't tell God what to do. Yeah.
Shall I do?
That's great.
Okay, is the multiverse theory incompatible with one creator? So I hope you understand that.
Slightly. I can't, not the maths, but so it's the idea that there are multiple universes, and this isn't something that's scientifically provable. It comes out of mathematics. Apparently, the mathematics is quite beautiful. And people think, that can be a evidence that it might be true. But one God, multiple universes, I don't really see a problem, given that I believe in a God who's outside of space and time, which would put him outside of the universe. God of one universe, or billions, or 2 or 9, or I think it's like the questions about life on other planets. It's not up to me to decide if it's okay for God to do that. If he did it, great. I'd love to know about them. So it's rather than seeing these things as a problem for an existence of God, sort of looking at it with the eyes of faith and saying, and also the eyes of science as well. I think we're used to getting the unexpected. Brilliant. Let's explore.
Thank you.
That's great. So another question, and Nico was really desperate to answer this one, but I'm going to put it to you, Ruth, first, if that's okay. because I think it's it's an interesting one. Does the Big Bang more or less lead to the conclusion that there is a God through the first push theory in order to not violate the rules of thermodynamics?
Right. So I think what we're getting at is, so I have to say I'm not a physicist, but I've heard Rodney Holder and David Wilkinson and various other astronomers, cosmologists. You can look them up on the Friday website, you'll get their talks. And is the Big Bang evidence for God, essentially? Is that what you're saying? So it's almost as if, did God light the blue touch paper? So, I mean, they said that more technically, it's the idea that we've created order from disorder. So you have this singularity, and then you get this universe that's unfolding into an injection of energy that enables disorder to become ordered. And I think I'm really, really reluctant to say things are evidence for God, because we're very willing to put our faith in science. Our society teaches us to put our faith in science. And our society teaches us that the best kind of evidence is scientific evidence. And that if there is scientific evidence, if there isn't scientific evidence for it, then you better not believe it. But I want to get back to thinking about all the other different kinds of evidence that we rely on in life. I mean, in science is changing rapidly. And I know there's something in the physics about the beginning of the universe not being a beginning in mathematically, and I think you probably best check out Stephen Hawking for that, not me. David Wilkinson and David Hutchings have written a book all about these kinds of questions, published by SPCK, I think. It's got a red cover. I can't remember the title, something about the Big Bang, and they'll explain it much better than I do. One of them's a really good physicist, and one of them's a really good theologian and cosmologist, so they do better than me. But
look, Ruth, I think that's really, really helpful. I think it's, we're dealing with some of these questions being asked are incredibly challenging, and certainly for someone, speaking personally, who's been a Christian for many years, trying to wrap your brain around some of this stuff is my tiny brain around these things is impossible. But it's been really encouraging to hear from you. I know the topic tonight was, does faith enhance science? But just on a personal level, listening to you as a scientist, how has science enhanced your faith?
I think I expected, going into my PhD, I was all ready to see proof for God, and then I realized how science really worked. And what I got was, I got my character built by PhD. Everyone who's done a PhD will tell you it nearly killed them. But through it, I discovered that God helped me. And I think that was like the biggest discovery I made. Sorry if that sounds a bit cheesy, but and just seeing the beauty of things, the intricacy, just an incredible privilege to get paid to look into the tiny details of things and to know the tiny details of things. It's like the 6-year-old dinosaur addict's idea of heaven, and that opened my eyes to how great God was, that he could make something like that. I think that always helps me to praise. Thank you, lots and lots of thank yous for what I see around. So and that sense of awe, knowing that God is greater than the universe, then when I feel that sense of awe at the things I'm learning about, I can think, well, God's greater than that, so he must be pretty great. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Ruth. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna draw a line under it there. Although Nico wanted to get into some thermodynamics, I think, don't you, Nico? Or just put the kids to bed.
I'm not sure. No, I put them to bed already. I love my thermodynamics though. But yeah, just to say, like, every session we've kind of voted for the best question, and whoever wins gets a book. And obviously we'd like to give your book away, Ruth. So just where can we get it? Is it already available if people want to buy it? And I'll definitely buy one to send to whoever wins this poll. So I'm going to put the poll up, but could you kind of let us know a bit more, where can we buy it so people can know if they're interested in buying it?
You can buy it now on the Lion website. Just search for my name, or cheeky, wait a few weeks and buy it half price on the Faraday website. So it depends how generous you're feeling, Nico.
It depends who wins it. We'll see if they get a quick response or later. So basically, I've put the poll up. The question I put them on the chat, but basically it's the first question is about the multiverse. The second one is about the evidence about Satan, and the third one is about would a scientist kind of be able to believe in miracles today. So if you can all try and respond, we're getting a lot of responses in slowly. There's a big tie between question 2 and 3 now. So if you're voting there, that's kind of the 2 that are winning. But just to say, like, thanks so much, Ruth. It's really interesting. There was more questions about dark matter and stuff that we found hard to interpret. But I think, like, just giving the evidence you said, and just we can go to the website and find books that are more kind of detailed for those specific things. But it's great to have scientists like you who believe in God and believe in science and kind of can give us an overview of that. So thanks so much for sharing. And we're going to end the poll, and the winner is question number 2 about Satan and the kind of proof of kind of evil. So thanks so much, Ruth. Thanks, Chris and Avril, for hosting again. Thanks, John Wilmer, for sharing at the beginning. And for everyone on the call, we've got 2 more sessions left. The next one is going to be something that kind of Ruth just touched very quickly. It's on fake news, miscommunication, and truth. So we're going to get 2 cybersecurity experts to talk about how social media works and the information we get, and how can we find truth in our media. So it's really, really interesting and very kind of practical for our life today. So please come around next Tuesday again for that session, please. It would be lovely to see everyone. But yeah, from all of us, thanks so much, Ruth. Thanks for your time. It's been really good to hear your replies.
Thank you. It was great being able to be involved. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.